anyway, I wanted to start off by telling this story about this morning. I was in my room and I was just sort of going through talking points and thinking about my presentation, and I get this phone call from Kim this morning. And mind you, I'm from the West Coast, and it's about 8 o'clock this morning, so it's 5 o'clock my time, really. And I answer the phone and go, hello? And she says, hi, is this Reg? And I said, yes. And then she said, well, this is Kim, and I'm just trying to make sure that everything's okay and that you made it in okay, you're here, and see if you needed anything. And I said, made it where? and she's been the conference coordinator, so she's been informing all of us, and it was one of those times where you felt this awkward dead silence, and it was deadpan on the phone. And it took everything I had not to just let her squirm for a while longer. I just had to say, no, I'm kidding, I'm here. So in any case, as Kyle introduced me, I'm from San Bernardino County, and I do recognize that we're probably ahead of time, so lunch is not going to be a problem because I do tend to talk a lot during my presentations, but I do recognize that I'm standing between you guys and lunch eventually, so I know that I have to watch my time, but I also recognize that when I'm done, you guys are actually going to applaud really loudly because of the fact that it's either because I did really well on this presentation or you're just hungry. I want you to know that I'm going back to California to tell them that it was because I was thought-provoking. So as I was preparing for this presentation, I began to think about what I was going to talk to you all about. And my topic is really around the labor force. And I didn't want to do a data presentation because I'm sure that all of you guys have heard a lot of data over the course of your careers. But I do want to talk about the factors that suggest what type of data you should consider when thinking about the labor force. I'm going to talk about this through the lens of San Bernardino County, and and it doesn't really matter what region that you're from, because the data and the factors are going to act the same regardless of region. But I'm, for obvious reason, going to use San Bernardino County as a case study. So let me first tell you what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on San Bernardino County, and that's primarily because I want you to understand sort of context as to why I'm talking about the things that I'm talking about, and how it actually fits into the region. I'm going to talk about the region, its economy, and the economic drivers associated with that economy. Then I'm going to jump into the labor force, and then I'm going to jump into some big trends that are affecting the labor force, and then close by talking about some of the big challenges for every region when addressing the future of your labor force in your region. And then you guys get to go to lunch, which is when the big applause happens, right, guys? So for those of you who don't know where San Bernardino County is, we're located in Southern California. We are the eastern border of LA and Orange counties, and we share a southern border with Riverside County. San Bernardino County and Riverside County make up what's called the Inland Empire of California. San Bernardino County is also the largest geographic county in the country. It's 20,000 square miles. To give you a sense of scale, if you take the Inland Empire, which is Riverside and San Bernardino counties, if you made them one state, we would be the 24th largest state in the union. That in and of itself offers us a great deal of both opportunities and challenges, primarily challenges because of such a large geographic area. The population of San Bernardino County is 2.1 million people, and it has a labor force of about 950,000 people. But as Chris talked about a labor shed, that labor shed extends far beyond San Bernardino County's borders, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. We are also one of the fastest growing economies in the entire country. Our core industry sectors are distribution and logistics, healthcare, manufacturing, government, and retail. However, it's important to note that distribution and logistics by far is our largest industry sector. It's really what has driven much of our economic growth over the past few decades, and I'm gonna really touch on that a little bit later because it does have a great deal of influence in the context of the labor force itself. And just for context, my role is I oversee the Economic Development Agency, which houses both economic development and workforce development underneath it. It's important to understand that because the lens by which we are approaching our view on the labor force actually applies to both sides of the proverbial coin, if you will. So when I took on this role, I was asked a question almost immediately, like within my first week, and that is that the staff and partners and people in the community asked me, "What's your vision for the county?" And you guys don't know this really, but I hail from San Diego. I actually had to, in accepting this job, I actually had to move to San Bernardino County from San Diego County. First off, who does that, right? But secondly, I moved to a region that I didn't know. I grew up in San Diego. So when they asked me the question, "What's your vision for the region?" Naturally, I said, "Why are you asking me? I just got here," right? But as I thought about the question more and more, I really came up with this response that we live by today, and most regions in the United States live by it in the same fashion. They just don't articulate it the way we articulate it in San Bernardino County. And that is that we want to become a magnet region. Now, the magnet concept isn't a new concept. Magnet status is actually from the healthcare industry. Hospital systems become magnet hospitals. And just to give you a little bit of explanation as to what a magnet hospital is, people want to go there because they're recognized for having the best doctors and nurses and quality of care in the entire industry. Doctors and nurses and every healthcare professional want to work for a magnet system because they want to be part of that recognized team that is one of the best doctors and nurses in the entire system, right? And every other hospital wants to be a magnet hospital because they want that notoriety. Very simply, magnet hospital systems are just really attractors of patients, of research. They're usually research institutions, of talent, all of those things. So we were applying this to a region. We were taking this concept of a magnet system out of the hospital system and applying it to our region. That isn't San Bernardino centric. That's every region in the United States. We're just articulating it. We're saying we want to be this magnet region. It's not a small task, to say the least. But really, a magnet region is an attractor of residents, of talent, of quality of life, of recreation, of food, of entertainment options, of businesses, of quality education systems. So that's what we aspire to be in San Bernardino County. So the first thing I started to do was really understand what made up our economy. So I began to take a look at the region and its economy. So what the regional makeup was and how it was going to change over time. And really what I really want you guys to think about is how things change over time. Not necessarily just point in time data, but what's happening over time. And so our regional makeup is important where we stand today, but just as important is where we've come from, because it gives us an understanding of the trajectory of where we're heading tomorrow. And if you think about it, we're trying to become this magnet region. As I said earlier, we have a very large distribution and logistics industry. It isn't by happenstance. Our regional makeup makes complete sense, actually. We're very connected to the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. Together, those two ports make up the 5th largest port in the world. There's a lot of goods movement that happens right through those two ports. We are at the convergence, San Bernardino County is at the convergence of some major arterial freeways that actually connect us to all of California and the rest of the country. We have rail. We also have 3 international airports. One of our airports, Ontario International Airport, has just become the #1 cargo airport in the entire country. It just surpassed Atlanta. So distribution and logistics isn't just our largest sector. We're actually anchored to it. And it's important to understand that for San Bernardino County, we understand where our anchors are natural. And we understand that they are going to provide us purview into what's possible and what's not possible in terms of growth in our region. Does that make sense, you guys? Okay, so distribution and logistics is going to play a critical role in our future growth. We already know that. Things like tourism and quality of life are clear drivers of our growth. We're seeing more and more big businesses that are considering relocating to San Bernardino County, or quite frankly, anywhere in the United States. And those businesses are now asking about quality of life factors such as bikeways and walkways and entertainment options and restaurants, recreation and education system. And that's primarily because businesses are understanding that their employees are going to have to live there. It's not just about the business. It's about understanding that the labor force is a critical asset for business success in any region, in any business model. So what are the factors that allow you as a business to take care of your labor force? Some are internal, many are internal, but some are environmental. That's really more about the region. So as we think about economic development, we think about business attraction, retention, expansion, and creation, quite frankly. And we think about that in the context of what are the things that drive our strategies around business attraction, retention, expansion, and creation. What are the business success factors that actually influence that? And we just talked about all of those quality of life factors. So how many of you guys know what Cornett is? A few of you? Okay, good. Cornett is a global corporate real estate network. I mean, it's a massive organization. It's global, and there's another organization, IAMC, which is the Industrial Asset Management Council. They're both global organizations, but the members of these organizations really are the corporate real estate executives. Those are the ones that really matter most. These are people that make the decision as to whether they are going to locate any company facility in your region or somewhere else, quite frankly. So I get to talk to them a great deal. And I was in a group setting with a whole slew of them, and I asked them a simple question. I said, what are the key factors that cause you to decide to locate a facility anywhere in the world? In other words, why would you locate a facility in location A versus location B? What's the distinction? Why A, why not B? The #1 and #2 reasons for locating a facility anywhere in the world is the availability of the labor force and the quality of that labor force. Think about that. The availability of the labor force and the quality of that labor force. That immediately said to me that labor force and workforce becomes a top priority for economic development, period. In order for you to think about whether or not you're going to attract new businesses, diversify businesses, or grow businesses, you have to be concerned about your labor force. When they told me that those were the number 1 and 2 factors, what you really have to understand is they're not suggesting that they're looking at those as, okay, those are just data points that we have to hit a check mark. They're suggesting that in order for them to succeed in that region that they're choosing, they have to have those 2 things: available labor force and quality labor force. It is where we began in San Bernardino County to think about labor force as a key economic driver. Think about that for a minute, you guys, because the reality is most regions think about their labor force in a passive context. When businesses show up to their region and they start creating these demands on talent, we cause the labor force to react to that demand on talent. And then when another business comes in, we react to that. If there's a shift in the economy, we react to that. That, by the way, is the reasons why a skills gap exists, because we're constantly reacting. In San Bernardino County, we decided that we are going to use the labor force as an economic driver, which is going to provide, which actually provides the context by which we are really going to talk about from here on out in my presentation. So we started looking at we started thinking about labor force because it's becoming one of our key economic drivers. We started to try and take down what labor force is actually, and how it acts in our region and what it really means to us. So we needed to look at the current makeup, which is what everybody does, right? And we take a look at demographics, we take a look at educational attainment, skills, degrees, certificates, location, et cetera. You guys get the picture, right? These are things that everybody looks at when they think about the labor force. But then we also started thinking about whether or not our current labor force is aligned with our economy. How's it acting in the context of our economy? In other words, do we have the right type of labor in our economy that causes our businesses to continue to grow and expand and, quite frankly, attract new businesses? So we got to asking that question and saying, okay, not only do we have the right labor, are we producing the right labor that actually supports our economic future and our current growth and our current needs? So now we're starting to emerge this question of what are the systems that actually influence our labor force in the context of alignment with our economy? And so we understand that as we think about alignment with the economy, we're now starting to think about whether or not our skills makeup in our region or our talent production system in our region is going to help us fulfill what our desires are to become a magnet region. If we're going to attract businesses and diversify our economy, we actually have to have influence over those things that cause whether or not our labor force is aligned with our current economy. And then we started really thinking about this notion of the right talent. So we started trying to understand how our labor force moves around in San Bernardino County. Now, everybody here is in this period of low unemployment rates. In California, we have the lowest unemployment rate in history now. We're sub 4%. So we're really trying to think about what's happening in our labor force, because businesses are already calling us and telling us we are in a struggle to find talent. We figured out that we realized that we have more than 250,000 workers a day leave our county only to go work in another county. Admittedly, we also benefit from the fact that others come work in our county. But really, what I'm trying to get to you guys is understand who those people are that are having to go to work in another region and leaving your region. Because that should provide for an understanding as to what business attraction and economic development could look like in the context of import and export of workers. We also, in San Bernardino County, educate and train a whole lot of people. We have a lot of educational institutions in our region. As a matter of fact, at Cal State San Bernardino, we have a globally recognized cybersecurity program, which is one of the top in the entire world in San Bernardino, at the Cal State San Bernardino. But here's the thing. The majority of our graduates, our students, upon graduation, leave the region. There's a problem, right? That of course they're leaving the region because they found really great jobs, which is a good thing, but it certainly gives us pause to think about how we're looking at our assets in our region, our ability to produce certain types of talent, and whether or not we're leveraging that to become a magnet attractor of the businesses that are associated with that talent. Does that make sense, you guys? So we have to think about it in that context, because talent production and business attraction, as I said, the number one and number two reasons, availability of the labor force and quality of the labor force. Talent production and business attraction are inextricable from one another now. So as we thought about the labor force, we started thinking about what are the things that impact the labor force. So here are some of the big trends. There's a myriad of them, but I just called out these 5 because I wanted to talk a little bit about them. Obviously, I just talked about unemployment being at its all-time low. We're literally at a full employment economy, virtually at a full employment economy, and really, by definition, a full employment economy is simply that anyone who wants a job has a job, and the remaining labor pool that you're addressing is what we call a non-traditional labor pool. So that's why we've got questions around formerly incarcerated folks. That non-traditional labor pool is what workforce systems all over the country are beginning to haggle with, are actually haggling with. And you see funding in workforce development actually sort of follow that flow, right? That workforce systems are now seeking to serve the hardest to serve, the disengaged workers, the non-traditional labor pools. That in itself causes workforce systems to react in a very different way. It's the available labor pool that's actually causing systems to change. It's causing workforce systems, education systems, to actually alter how they're providing services or who they're concentrating on or even who they're partnering with, that suggests that they're going to be able to reconcile some of the unmet demands of business, right? So really, unemployment has its ripple effects that can cause systems to shift. But here's the thing. We all know that economies are cyclical. So as data folk, what you need to understand is we're just a slight correction away from that picture completely changing on us, right? So then, if I'm San Bernardino County and I want to remain this magnet region, what do I have to think about? The folks that we are serving today in workforce circles all around the country, we are getting them training and then getting them to employment right away to get to outcomes, right? We're doing that as fast as we can, and we know that transactions are happening because there is such this demand for a labor pool. But who's impacted first when a correction happens or when the economy starts trending down? The first people to go are the people you just served. Think about that. What are the key data elements that you're going to provide to your regional leadership around how do you mitigate that kind of impact? Because what that does is it turns around, and if they're the first folks to be let go in a downturn in the economy, what that does is actually causes even a deeper dependence on your social safety net programs. Oops, excuse me, I'm gonna throw microphones around now. But if you think about that, that's a key issue that you have to think about. The reasons why I'm calling this out is for all of you guys to think about data in unemployment in the context of becoming a little more predictive. That's sort of a theme, a thematic that I'm going to weave in and out of this entire presentation, is becoming more predictive and understanding how programs and systems should actually act so that you're creating an underpinning around economic growth. So we're also seeing that migration is a key factor in San Bernardino County. As I said before, we're the eastern border of Los Angeles and Orange counties. What we're seeing is that millennials, quite frankly, are coming of age where they want to start families, they're thinking about buying a home, and they're realizing they can't do that in an urban, they can't afford to buy the home in an urban area, so they're beginning to move out to the suburbs. That's not any different than any other generation. I mean, that's what happens every generation. As young people, we all move to the urban cores, and then as we begin to think about settling down, buying homes, and starting families, we begin to migrate out to the suburbs. Here's the thing, though. San Bernardino County is literally the suburb of LA and Orange counties. And so they're beginning to migrate out for affordable housing. But what does the data tell us for San Bernardino County from a policy perspective, from a practice perspective, from a system design perspective, from an economic opportunity and development perspective? The data tells us that we're getting younger as a county. We're already our average age is already at 32, and it's dropping. We're getting younger. The people that are coming are much more educated. They are already employed. They are in their own professions. They're about to have kids, and they're going to have different expectations on services, community, educational institutions. All of those things are beginning to evolve because of who's coming into San Bernardino County. As a matter of fact, we are projected to add another 1.2 million people in the next 8 years or so into the Inland Empire. That's like adding the entire city of New Orleans to the Inland Empire of Southern California. It's absolutely causing demographic shifts that changes our profile as a region. Now, I talked about I mentioned the labor shed before. This migration is actually suggesting that now they're becoming residents, and they're not commuting in or out of the region. They're becoming residents of San Bernardino County. How does that change your business attraction profile? How do you look at that from a pitch perspective? That if all roads are leading to San Bernardino County anyway, why not you as a business? Think about that a little bit. So, as I talked about the economic growth factors, migration is really a key factor for San Bernardino County. It suggests to us that we are evolving a great deal. Along with that evolution creates a whole different mindset, a whole different approach to what communities look like, what business makeup, what our talent pool looks like. The other things that we are that impact the labor force is this notion of all these generations in the workplace simultaneously. First off, it's causing both angst and change in workplace circles, but really, there's a couple challenges. One is that we have this retirement cliff that everybody has to deal with, right? And this retirement cliff, it's a real thing. It's not small, it's massive. But it represents the loss of institutional knowledge and talent. But even a bigger concern is, where are you going to get the replacement worker in this time of low unemployment rates and everybody's struggling to find talent? So it's really an interesting thought to talk about, because businesses are now beginning to understand that they are part of the talent development pipeline. And that's only for their own survival as they think about succession planning. But really, that's actually the wave of the future. And I want you guys to understand that, because one of the things that we are studying in San Bernardino County is how our business makeup is actually evolving, and what that means for us systemically. So space planning, as I said, I deal with a lot of corporate real estate folks, and these younger generations are actually changing corporate culture and changing the way business is done. They're actually planning space around the leanings of the younger generations. We're seeing open spaces, we're seeing game rooms appear in workplaces. We're seeing living room areas, kitchens, food options. Heck, I even know of a company that has beer Fridays. That is all being done to attract and retain talent. All that design, all those design shifts is really around talent. And so understand that the marketplace is being driven by this labor force issue. So really trying to get a grasp and understanding of what's happening in the labor force provides you an understanding of what's going to evolve all the way down to the workplace. It's really interesting to watch this happen and have conversations with these corporate real estate folks, and them talk about, oh my gosh, these young people, they're all entitled, they complain about them, then they design space for them. It's cool, actually. And then there's this notion of exploration that actually influences our labor force. Because as we're thinking about the retirement cliff and trying to figure out where the replacement workers are coming from, the real challenge is, are kids going to even choose that profession or that occupation, or do they even know it exists, much less adults? That's probably the biggest challenge out there. We all know that kids think that hospitals are only doctors and nurses. They don't think about pharmaceutical techs, rad techs, physical therapists, which are all great paying occupations. They're limited in their purview. So this notion of understanding how exploration, career exploration, actually can be a strategic factor for the evolution of the economy and your region, because we know that the economy is going to continue to shift and change. And how do kids actually understand how to begin to navigate or understand what they want to be when they grow up, if for us not designing systems around deliberately exposing them to different career pathways, as asked by Henry over there. So industry makeup is another influencing factor around our labor force and the understanding of our labor force. As we work to close the skills gap, we have to think about what that looks like today versus what that looks like in the future. So the makeup of your industries in your region, you need to study them. Not just study them today, and I keep saying this, not just point-in-time data, what it looks like today, because you'll always see, what your demand sectors are looking like. When Kyle was out presenting to our region around our industries, we actually wanted him to tell us where our industries were heading. So traditionally, workforce systems, every workforce system in the entire country does this. They define their demand industry sectors. It creates their policies around investments, of training dollars and where they want to focus, all of those things. They define their demand industry sectors. But that's done through a rear view facing study, right? It's what grew yesterday or last year is going to be our demand sectors for this year, right? But what happens in an environment where change is a norm and it's accelerating? What happens when your business industry continues to shift? So I did this, I was asked to do this opening talk for a listening session for businesses. And this listening session had every leader from K-12 in it, community colleges, universities, workforce, economic development, and about 100 business owners and leaders throughout the entire region. And it was about the future of work, not in the context of what's going to happen in, an environment of the gig economy or AI and robotics, but rather, what is the future of the workplace? What's happening in the workplace? It was a listening session with businesses so that we could get real-time intelligence around what's actually happening in the workplace that suggests that skills are going to change. So I started the opening by saying, everybody in this room has talked about the skills gap at some point in their career. And everybody sort of nodded. And I said, the president's talking about the skills gap, as did the president before him, and the one before him, and the one before him, and so on and so forth. And I said to them, so after all of these years of addressing the skills gap, by show of hands, how many of you think that we're any closer to closing it? Kind of the same reaction. Not a single person raised their hand. And I said, let me tell you why that is. The skills gap is actually dynamic. It's actually changing and evolving with the marketplace. But here's the thing. Why do we think that it is an effective policy to address a dynamic issue with a static response? Think about that. So I told them, when I'm in real life and I'm chasing something, and it stays ahead of me, and it begins to go around that curve, the first thought that runs through my head is, can I cut through this park and cut it off over there? Because I'm catching that sucker. Nothing's going to get away from me, right? And it's that simple in real life when we're chasing something. So why couldn't we apply the same concepts to the skills gap? This is where you guys come in. It's understanding that the skills gap is moving. This is where we need to become much more predictive in our understanding of our labor force and our labor market so that we understand what strategies and actions and activities we should partake in. Does that make sense, you guys? So, current versus predictive. Current's obviously tactical. Predictive is much more strategic in nature. So the other factors that influence our labor force are really around disruptions. Disruptions are playing a massive role in San Bernardino County. And they're happening because there's a lot of factors that cause disruptions, but primarily in business, disruptions are happening because simply businesses are trying to keep up with the marketplace. As I said, our largest sector by far is distribution and logistics. Amazon went to 2-hour delivery windows. And Amazon going to 2-hour delivery windows had a ripple effect on the entire industry. I have business owners saying to me, you know, we struggled with 2-week and 1-week product turnaround times. Now we have to think about product turnaround times in 2 days or 2 hours. Think about how that has impacts on labor and what's going to happen in the industry. The other thing about the disruptions, aside from business models being disrupted, technology is beginning to disrupt our largest industry sector in San Bernardino County. We know that the distribution and logistics sector by far is the most susceptible industry to technological advances of any other industry. We know that machines, driverless cars, drones, you name it, all of it impacts distribution and logistics. I said that it's our largest industry sector by far. If you can imagine this, if our distribution and logistics sector in San Bernardino County adopts technologies, those technologies, robotics, AI, machines, we will be one of the largest purchasers as a region of those technologies in the entire world. Now, I said a second ago that Amazon went to 2-hour delivery windows. You know why that is? It's a simple concept. It's not an Amazon thing. It's a marketplace thing. It's the fact that Amazon wants to get closer to their customer. You guys, all of you guys. Amazon's on this march to try and get as close to their customer as possible. That's why it's almost like replicating you going into a store and just grabbing an item and being able to put it in your basket. It's getting that close to your customer. But that's not an Amazon thing. That's a marketplace thing. Every company in the world wants to get closer to their customer. So what do you think is going to happen to San Bernardino County when we become the largest purchaser of robotics, machines, AI, and technology in the world? Those companies and those supply chains are going to want to get closer to their customer, one of their largest customers. This gives us purview into where our opportunities and where our diversification strategies are. How does that apply to each of your regions? All of that is really about data and understanding. It's understanding this sort of convergence of where data is beginning to integrate. And so when we think about data, we think about even data that's not connected to one another. So I have this friend that's a futurist, and he and I have had, and I just got to make sure I don't make you guys late for lunch. He and I have lots of conversations around futurist thinking. And he said, Reg, we think about change in 3 layers. The upper layer is where change happens really fast. It's like a Richter scale, right? It happens really fast. The change that's in that is anything from day-to-day activities to the election of a new president. So it's that type of change that happens really fast. The change layer below that happens a little more slow, a little slower. And in that change are your ages, sort of your Stone Age, your technology age, all of those ages, right? And they're a little more prolonged. And the change level below that is where change very rarely happens. It's very slow and progressive. And that layer of change is really around cultures, beliefs, things like that, that withstand generation after generation. What he said was, but here's the thing. When something happens at the lower levels of change, it's kind of like the tectonic plates in the earth. When they shift, thank you very much, Kyle. When they shift, it causes everything else up top to start shaking. It's an earthquake, right? It shifts. Everything else up top starts shaking. My question to you guys is, what are the data connections that cause you to better understand what's going to shift in your region, and so that you can better inform system design and policy? That makes sense? Excuse me. And I promise I'm almost done. Okay, well actually let me go back to that. I just want to talk about the fact that site selectors. I've begun to start having conversations and doing presentations, and actually not necessarily just presentations, doing quite a few workshops where site selectors are beginning to ask me to come in and talk about this concept of point-in-time data versus data over time. Because the marketplace is evolving so quickly. We know that AI and robotics and all of that stuff, the gig economy, all those things are shifting the way business is happening, right? Well, site selectors, as I said, the number 1 and 2 reason is the quality of the labor force and the availability of that labor force, right? But what they do is they go in and they go to Chamorro, or they go wherever else they get data from, and they pull a data set that gives them a profile of a region. And they say, it looks like we can succeed there. Knowing full well their business is going to change. And it's the pace of that change is going to continue to accelerate. And that means that their demands for skills is also going to change. Think about that. How long is this data that they just pulled good for? Businesses aren't trying to locate in a region so that they can succeed today or even for the next 2 years. They're looking to relocate in a region because it's a large capital investment to succeed for the long haul. This is what I'm beginning to teach the site selection community. They don't want to understand point-in-time data. They want to understand the systems that are behind the production of that point-in-time data. Does that make sense, you guys? Because it's really about systems production that you have to think about. If that leans in your favor, you're not just going to be successful in a region today, but you're going to be successful in that region for the long haul. Okay. So some of our big challenges in the context of the fact that the labor force is evolving and changing and business demands are changing and we have unemployment rates, all of these influencing factors. Some of our biggest challenges that we face is really in the context of talent acquisition versus talent production. Are we sitting here transacting in our regions around what our demands are today? When you look at job openings, are the job openings, is that what we're addressing in our regions today? Is how do we find the worker for that job opening or those job openings? Or are we looking at the systems, our ability as a region to produce the talent that suggests to us that the job openings that we see over time? So Chris put up that slide that started talking about different occupations. And she started talking about the intelligence behind understanding that you have these different profiles of occupations, and then you can expand the definition and then turn around and draw from a larger pool of people. I would suggest to you that if you want to really understand your region, take a look at those occupations and those openings over time. You will begin to see and understand that the makeup of the demands of skills in your region is beginning to shift. You're going to understand certain occupations are going to be emergent in your region, not necessarily industry sectors. I've got a board member in our workforce board in San Bernardino County that says, Reg, you know what? The warehouse of today is not the same warehouse your grandfather used to know. And what he means by that is that the warehouses all have offices in them. They're not just these big empty boxes full of goods. They all have lots of offices in them, and they all have a lot of professional staff, and they have a lot of IT workers and everybody that you can ever imagine inside of those warehouses. So if you begin to understand job openings in the context of them over time and how they're beginning to grow and what skills are being demanded on, you're going to understand where your region's heading and how to think about systems that allow you to accelerate that progression and grow it. Does that make sense, you guys? So talent development systems are really difficult to really talk about because it's really about bringing all of these big systems together, right? Anyone who contributes to the labor force or the quality of that labor force, any system, you bring them together. And so that could be, that creates a talent pipeline. That could be K-12, community colleges, universities, workforce development, et cetera. You guys get the picture, right? Bringing them together is only the beginning. It's really around thinking about what integration and alignment of those big systems are, which really gets us to the agility of big systems. These are massive bureaucracies. They're not small. They're massive bureaucracies. They move incredibly slow, and they're wedded to the way they do business. They don't change for anything. So obviously the big challenge here is to get them to become much more agile. And what we found in San Bernardino County is we're doing this work, but it is really not around telling them how they need to change their business today, but really around projecting what we're going to look like in the future and reverse engineering that and what it's going to take from us today to realize that future. Does that make sense, you guys? That's what we're doing. We're beginning to cause these big systems to see that they contribute to what our picture looks like in the future. So the agility of big systems really, really matters. So if you can become much more predictive in your data analytics, then the big, slow-moving bureaucracies, if they react to predictions that are accurate, and there are obviously predictions, but you've got data scientists all over the place. You guys can cause your indicators that give you really strong predictions. If they're reacting to predictions, when the needs emerge, they're already there, right? It's sort of the Wayne Gretzky thing, skate to where the puck is going to be. Well, that's what you need to do with your big systems in order to cause them to look agile. And then the last big challenge is really understanding where data analytics integration actually really matters. I would suggest to you guys that the traditional data source, the traditional things that we look at in terms of data, they're not enough. We're learning a whole lot. We have access to more data today than we've ever had before. And we just need to understand by layering data and really thinking about what picture that emerges, we can actually become really predictive. And I want to close with this story. I was on a plane, actually on the way to Boston to teach that site selection class. And I got to sit next to this really interesting lady who talk too much, but she was really interesting, and she speaks on technology and how it's advancing, and she does this talk around how she's beginning to tie dots together, and it's because of all that we know about literally everybody. think about this. She framed a picture that was actually a little bit scary. She said, you know, right now when you go shopping online, it's called a pick and ship scenario. You look for what you want and you pick it, and then you have it shipped to you. And she goes, the future is going to be in ship and pick. And I go, what does that mean? And she said, you know, there's so much data about you, your habits, who you connect to, what things attract you to, that cause you to look at them, what you buy, when you bought it, where you buy it from. All of those things sort of really create this profile of who you are. And if we get to a place where we connect all this data, companies are just going to know that you're out of dish soap. So they're going to send you a big, huge box with dish soap in it. But what's also in that box is going to be a few shirts that we know you're going to like in your exact size, some shoes, some items that you were probably looking for when you were trying to research about your, 1992 car, whatever, and all of these things that are going to be in this box. And she says, you're going to take your dish soap out because you need it, and then you get to choose what you want to keep in the box. And then you'll just take those, hang it up in your closet, or do whatever you need to do, and then leave the rest of the box out on your porch, and it'll get picked up, and you'll be billed for what you took. I tell you that story because, I don't know if she's right or wrong. I assume that she's probably right because that is actually the marketplace saying that we need to become much more predictive in nature. But that's what I want to close with, is that I think, as you guys are all sort of data geeks, kind of like me, I think our future is in our ability to tie multiple data sets together so that we can predict where we're heading and where our activities are best utilized, or our strategies are best utilized for economic prosperity in our own regions. And with that, thank you very much. I told you there's an applause.